What's happening, everybody? Welcome back to the Chaplaincy on the Go podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the Fearless family of churches. I'm your host, Josh Zorhoff. I am a teaching pastor and counselor in the West Michigan area, and we are continuing our conversation on stress. We're actually wrapping it up for the time being. And we're going to talk again with my friend, Dave McGovern, another counselor, and he's going to help walk us through the realities of how stress and digital media and digital technology play a role in working together to compound our stress. Dave has done a lot of work and a lot of research when it comes to understanding the dynamics of social media and how digital technology actually increases and impacts our stress. So we're going to hear a lot from Dave, but he's also going to give us some helpful strategies to consider in times that we need to manage our stress and maybe take a tech time out or take some time away from that technology. And so as we go into this, just keep an open mind. How you view your technology might need to come into play with how you're going to engage with some of what Dave has to say. So with all of that, we're going to jump in right now. So here we are, talking about stress. Back again with us is Dave McGovern, counselor at Winning at Home. Dave, you know a lot about stress and you know a lot about technology and how they work together. You've done a lot of workshops on this. You've talked to a lot of parents about this. We want to dive into how digital technology and social media have impacted stress over the years, but also what we need to know, not only as people who interact with technology, but maybe as parents or people who work with children. How does stress and social media and digital technology, how does that impact us?
Yeah, I think, it's fun to be back here again. Thanks for having me. I think we have to start with the reality. Cal Newport poses a great question. He says there's more of a statement. We can either utilize technology, all the things that it offers and the advancements of the ways that it's made us life easier or better. We can utilize those, or technology can use us. And I think what we have found since 2010, at least what's being reported and through research, is that the tech companies and especially social media, it's really using us. We are hooked on it on lots of different ways, and we can talk about how that sort of impacts our stress. But just acknowledging that we've sort of opted into this social experiment where we all have phones and we're all connected. And one of the, if you were to search keywords from multiple streams of research, like key phrases that is coming out over and over the last 10 to 12 years, is that we are more connected than ever, but we are more lonely and isolated than ever. And that got expedited, as many of us experienced going into the pandemic a few years ago. And so it's creating all sorts of different stressors, mental health problems that we just kind of need to be aware of. And that it wasn't necessarily by accident that the manufacturers and the design of our phones, of social media, was meant to get as much of our attention as possible. And when we're already a hurried people, that doesn't bode well to combat stress.
I remember reading, I think it was in 2017, Shelly Turkle came out with a book called Alone Together. And I think it described what you're talking about there, that we're more connected more than ever. Like we have these devices in our pockets that are supercomputers, and we can connect to people all over the world. I texted a friend today who's in Honduras on a mission trip.
Mhm.
And I'm like, that's amazing. Like we can
Yes.
stay in communication and we're more connected. But these devices are actually creating a false sense of connectedness. And it's driving us to be alone while at
Mhm.
the same time be connected. And we're living in a paradox. And that creates anxiety for us.
Yeah. And there's no break. And I think that's the thing. There's lots of there's good things that we can utilize. Like you just said, man, texting a friend halfway around the world who's in Honduras, like what a beautiful thing, right? There are lots of things that we can utilize, as Cal Newport would say, technology for our benefit that can enhance. It's just being honest. I always, when I have a conversation with this, and then even in my own journey, Josh, and especially with my kids being middle schoolers now, I always kind of go back to this quote that I'm going to read real quick. It's from Sean Parker. For us, he's the inventor of Napster, and we know what that means and how we got to burn our first discs of CD, or allegedly, I don't know if I did that, Josh, but essentially, the first time you could download a song, he created Napster. He was also the first vice president of Facebook. So he describes himself as a conscientious social media objector. He doesn't use it. Okay.
Wow.
And so here's what he says about social media. God only knows what it's doing to our children's brains. The thought process that went into building these applications, Facebook being the first of them, was all about how do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible. And that means we need to sort of give you a little dopamine hit every once in a while because someone liked or commented on a photo or a post or whatever. And that's going to get you to contribute more content, and that's going to get you more likes and comments. It's a social validation loop. Exactly the kind of thing a hacker like myself would come up with because you are exploiting a vulnerability in human psychology. The inventors, creators, that's me. It's Mark Zuckerberg. It's Kevin Systrom on Instagram. It's all of these people. We understood this consciously, and we did it anyway.
Dang. So tell me, you mentioned dopamine.
Yep.
Tell me why that's important.
I think it's important because it plays into the social validation loop. Okay. So every time your phone buzzes or you think you might get a like or a heart on Instagram, or you actually do, there is literally a little dopamine kick that comes in, and that's your pleasure receptor of your brain. And so you actually feel better by experiencing some type of what he explained, that social validation. What he means by that is there's a little buzz in your pocket or a little moment during your day that says, you know what? I'm enough. Someone sees me. Someone likes me. And that feels really good, right? Like if you were to hear from someone face to face, hey, Josh, I see you. I want to validate you. You matter. That's going to be like, well, more of that, please. And they know that, right? And so by creating the social validation loop, they created this ecosystem where people are posting, commenting, liking, and then waiting to receive likes back. I love what David Zoll has a book called Seculosity, and it's basically, he breaks down kind of culture of how we navigate our enoughness, and he talks about technology. And he got rid of his smartphone. He's a journalist and a blogger. Because he was constantly swinging back and forth with big emotions of either using his phone to distract him of all the narratives in his head that says he wasn't enough, or to receive a like to go against that, or find something that he thought he was better than. And so it was this recalibration every day of trying to find and manage his enoughness. And it went into the dopamine hit, and it went into what was his social validation loop, right? And that's adults, man. Like we grew up with a rotary phone or a cordless phone. Like we didn't have a digital connection 24/7 in our pockets, right?
Yep.
So we can separate ourselves from that as adults. If you're a parent, or if you can kind of separate yourself from that, we still find ourselves scrolling too much, watching tons and consuming so much media on our phones. But for our kids, man, they don't know any different, right? They have published articles that have been put in front of the Supreme Court where Instagram actually targeted, especially girls ages 11 to 18, where they would withhold likes. There was an algorithm that would withhold people actually liking their photos. And then at a certain point of their day, they would flood their phones with all of those likes, and it actually created more of a dopamine hit, which would create more
of an addiction
loop and more addiction.
So, okay, let's break this down for people who are listening.
Yeah.
We're not here to scare you off of social media.
No, sorry.
Completely.
No.
But we do want you to be aware, because this is really important. If I post something on social media, first of all, it tells me that I have friends who aren't really friends, but they're people I think I'm connected to, but I'm posting probably by myself, or at a minimum in my car or in the chair at home. And my wife is probably there, but I'm not talking to her. And so I'm disconnected from all of these people, but I feel connected to all of these people. And my brain can't tell the difference in that moment. And then I post this. And when I post it, I have an expectation that someone is going to comment on it or like it or say, hey, that's really cool. I love that picture of your son, or that was a great sermon idea, or thanks for sharing this. That's really helpful. And so my brain is expecting to get approval from that. And when I do get that approval, I get a dopamine hit. And that dopamine makes me feel good. Makes me feel loved. It makes me feel safe. It makes me feel like I'm connected. But here's the problem with dopamine. It has a half-life, which means the next time I get a dopamine hit, I need more of it to get the same sense of satisfaction. And that's the way that it works. So you need more and more and more, but it actually delivers less and less and less. So we get to the point where we have this huge expectation for relief and belonging and love and euphoria because of what people are saying. But even when people are saying really good things, after a while, if it's the same people and it's the same amount of likes, it's not enough. And then we have an expectation that isn't met, and we walk away feeling like we need more. And so we post more and we search more. And that's why people can go 3 or 4 hours a day, Dave, 3 or 4 hours a day on social media is what Apple has recently come out to say. Yeah, we're probably looking at 3 to 4 hours a day of scrolling through our phones and interacting with social media.
Yeah. And that's probably for the average adult. The screen time average, which isn't high, but just the average for a high schooler in America, is right around 9.5 hours right now.
Can you say that again?
The most recent study, high schoolers for screen time, it's not all social media, but the majority of it is, but it's not considered homework. So this would be opt-in digital media and social media. Okay. The average is about 9.5 hours.
9.5 hours. We're talking a full work week.
Yes.
Of social media.
Yep. And Josh, you bring something interesting. We need more of the dopamine hit. And so we scroll more, we post more, and we sort of just get lost in it. But what they're finding is that we are actually becoming relationally bankrupt. Where we can't decipher the belonging. We have a term for that, but we aren't actually experiencing it, because there's something that we experience when we belong that we actually require face-to-face contact. We actually require eye contact. The same person you brought up, Shelly Turkle, she has a really great book and research on reclaiming the conversation. And she just studied people at MIT and other Ivy Leagues. And some of the freshmen they studied, this is what they said: I'm so excited for college because I'm finally going to learn how to have a conversation. And they were dead serious. They were dead serious.
What?
And she's connecting the neurology behind what we actually lose in our belonging and feeling safe and seen from face-to-face contact. And there's an entire generation, and honestly, some adults, that's why we feel isolated and lonely at times, and our phones don't help, of reclaiming, like, how do we redeposit, like get out of relational bankruptcy and not feeling isolated, even though we can scroll and like and share stuff, right?
So I want to pause on that. I'm thinking about a couple of just problems that I keep seeing. I'm sure you keep seeing. When anxiety increases, people look for a chance to escape. They look for a chance to valve that anxiety in some way, to vent it in some way, or to get away from it in some way. And there are some people who go to their phones and say, well, my phone is a way for me to escape. It's a way for me to relax. Like, I just scroll through and I mindlessly go through. But if what you're saying is true, there's a twofold problem. One, that device is actually creating more stress, but you think it's helping you relax. And so what you're doing is working against yourself if you are not putting that device away. And then two, one of the primary ways, and we've talked about this, to heal from hard experiences, to heal from stress, one of the primary ways to do that is to have authentic, safe conversations. And basically what I hear you saying, Dave, is that can't happen over social media. That has to happen face to face with eye contact. That has to happen in proximity to another person who is willing to listen.
Yes. Even I don't know how they would rate them on the like effectiveness, but like even texting would be slightly better than a like. Okay, because there is some type of interaction, but Google points out that even the texting, it does not and cannot replace face-to-face confessing community, a relational, exactly what you just said. And if we're more isolated and we're spending more and more time on our phones looking down, we're just adding fuel to the fire of our already anxious and over-scheduled lives.
Now, I know that I do, in the work that I do as a chaplain and as a counselor, I will take phone calls and I'll talk through on the phone, and that's helpful.
Yeah, that would be its own sort of category, and we don't want to get rid of the phone, right?
And if need be, we can do a Zoom call, but all things being equal, nothing can replace a face-to-face conversation. If you're dealing with stress, a text can help, a phone call can help, a Zoom call can help, but finding some face-to-face interaction with someone who actually cares and wants to listen, there's no replacement for that. And the problem is social media tricks us into thinking that it will. And in fact, it doesn't make it better. It makes it profoundly worse as it goes on.
Yeah. Well, it's what's interesting, Josh, at least I think it is at my worst, when I'm like just attached to my phone, I think we all have those seasons. We've had them long enough, where you're just kind of glued. And maybe it's not even social media. It's just, it becomes this thing that's in your hand, and it's safe, or at best a distraction, right? But I think all of us at some point have said, I think I'm on my phone too much. Maybe not adolescents, but adults. We remember a different time. And I think it's interesting, right before the pandemic, the Stress in America survey found that 68% of Americans strongly agree that periodically unplugging from their phone and doing a digital detox was important to their mental health. On a follow-up survey, only 22% were willing to try it.
Dang. So we know that it's good for us.
And we can sense it. I think so. I think when we look around our living rooms, Josh, and I hear this all the time in my counseling room, when we look around our living room during family time or when we're with our spouse and there's a show on the TV and then everyone is looking down at their own device, I think something goes off in us and says, maybe there's a different way. How do we get here? And then we keep scrolling or reading an article or diving into news.
Yep.
I mean, the constant stream of news is something new for us.
Oh, man.
And the negative comments that are polarizing to our own ideologies or someone we know, that just news, just digital news, they are finding spikes our anxiety and stress levels. And so if you are, it's kind of like the Matrix. If we're like constantly plugged in, right? Whether it's social media, news, blogging, all the things, we're constantly sifting through and navigating, like David Zoll says, our enoughness. And are we right or are we wrong? Which heightens our fight or flight.
Mm.
And it puts a tremendous amount of elongated, steady stress through our work week, family time. And
Yes.
I'm not here to say, like, I mean, I don't know if people will be able to see this video, but I have an iPhone. So I'm not saying get rid of your phone. I enjoy the texting feature and lots of things on it. Okay.
Yep.
No one in the current research is suggesting that we get rid of technology. We just want to utilize it. We want to be the ones utilizing the technology. We want to opt into the right things, but also have moderation and know when it's time to opt out.
Yep.
The previous things that we talked about on when you had me on with stress, outside of using like a mindfulness app, it requires us to unplug.
Yep.
Breathing, the reflection, all of those things, we need to do those without our phones.
So I want to touch on something that you brought up. It has to do with the media and specifically news outlets. Gavin de Becker, who is he's the world's leading authority on human protective measures against violence. And so he runs Gavin de Becker and Associates, which is a protection firm in California. And so he trains, people on how to predict human violence. And his book, The Gift of Fear, talks about how fear is actually really important because it helps us recognize threats against our survival. He has an entire chapter devoted to how major news outlets capitalize on our fear to hook us in and keep us afraid. And we do that at our own peril, because if we're afraid of everything, we won't actually be afraid of the real threats when they come. And so his chapter alone, for those of you who are listening, his chapter on fear and the media alone is worth listening to or reading because it is profound. And that ties into even social media.
Yeah.
Because the people who run social media outlets, they actually want you to be afraid of certain things. They want you to think that they have all the information. People are posting all of this and it is impacting us. And so taking a break from the news, if you're stressed out, don't turn on the news. Just see how it goes for a week. I know that sounds scary, but I gave up the news 6 months ago. And now if something is really important, my wife will tell me. My wife will tell me if I need to know. And I feel so much peace. And I don't post on social media hardly at all these days. And when I catch myself scrolling through, I actually have other things to look at, whether that's a book or reading through the Bible. So what are some helpful practices, Dave, that we can do to keep ourselves out of this stress spiral? Yeah.
Well, I just want to say I'm gonna list off in a second just some practical things that people can try, and it comes from Cal Newport's digital minimalism of how to do a digital detox. But he will say when it comes to the news to take 30 days, and in a given week, don't spend more than 5 minutes for an entire week looking at digital news, and never in the 30 days looking at the comments. And to opt into only getting your news from print media, getting a couple different papers, but if we want to keep up on it, to read it, because there's no comments. And sure, maybe whatever you're buying might have a bias or whatever, but it engages a different part of our brain. And so he would say limit digital news if you're detoxing from our phones and technology to a limit of 5 minutes a week with no comments.
There's also a website called The Pour Over that I use.
Mm-hmm.
It just gives you information. It doesn't give you comments. It doesn't give you commentary. It just says, hey, here's what's happening. Here's what's happened. Pay attention to it. And then you're done. It's a 5-minute read on keeping up to date on what's happening in the world.
Yeah. So here's some things that we can maybe, that you could maybe try, right? And this comes from Cal Newport's Digital Detox, okay? You can ease into this, and he would suggest 30 days. I'll suggest a week, okay?
Right.
Find a week where you remove all optional digital media, okay? So optional does not mean work email. That doesn't mean your call and your text. Or if you are required to get a paycheck by posting marketing things for your company through Instagram, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about your own personal Instagram and communication accounts, Netflix, all digital consumption, things you opt into, put it aside for 7 days. Okay?
Even this podcast.
Sure.
This podcast
absolutely.
will still be here after 7 days.
Yeah. Okay. Now, during that 7 days, here's some experiments or things to try. Dock your phone out of your room and use a regular alarm clock. Do not eat with your phone, even if you're taking a lunch break and you're grabbing something, but especially if you have kids and you're sharing the table with your family, there's no screens allowed during the 7-day period. Schedule out select times to check your email. And make sure you have scheduled times, a reminder to put your phone away, whether that's in the evening or maybe it's in the morning. Andy Crouch is a writer on technology and a whole bunch of other awesome things. And he had a rule where he didn't use his phone between the nines. So he didn't touch his phone before 9 a.m. and he didn't touch it after 9 p.m. And that's, you can tailor those times, but it's being mindful of saying, I'm going to utilize this device when I need to, not letting it utilize me or use me. Okay. I already mentioned the read print news and media. And then he really encourages, if it's a 30-day, and you can maybe even do this in the 7-day, to engage, rediscover, or try some new activities that either bring you joy or rest that don't involve a phone. You can do that with another person, with a spouse, or with family. If you're single, it's just re-engaging something that's like, oh, I used to like that, or I've always wanted to try this. It brings a sense of, a little bit of adventure and experience that you get to lean into. And then if you're like, yeah, I don't know if I'm going to do any of that, here's some other big picture categories that you could try, okay? When you think about rhythms and routines with your phone, okay? Once a week, select 12 hours and don't look at your phone. But do not disturb on it. You can select particular family members, whether that's a grandparent or your spouse, or maybe there's someone that might need to get a hold of you. There's a feature that those calls can come through, but put it on do not disturb. That button is a gift from Apple. And if whatever it is on the Android, there's got to be a don't bother me now button. But take 12 hours, try that. Once a month, put your phone away for 48 hours. And then once a year, put your phone away for 5 days. And that's just, that would be considered sort of a digital detox rhythm and routine that you can, regardless of some of the specifics, those are some time frames you could fool around with. And if we have time, I want to share just one story, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
I was meeting with, and maybe we could do another one specifically on adolescent and emerging adults and truly the impact it's having and what we can do as mentors or parents.
Yeah.
But there was a junior in high school who did an experiment for 14 days, essentially. I think it was part of a science class, to journal and reflect on how she felt going 14 days without her phone. And she journeyed this experience, and then about 5 days in, started writing and journaling and reporting how freeing she felt and how just about herself and even just the stress level and some of the things that she was thinking about. And it was so freeing for her that once she turned her paper in, she asked the teacher said, "How did it go?" And she said, "I actually just told all my friends that I got grounded for another 2 weeks from my phone because I've never felt better."
Wow.
So she couldn't socially take the hit of saying I'm not on my phone, but by having an excuse that it was taken away, experienced so much freedom. And we just honestly, we don't know until we have like a 12 to 48 hour period without it. And so it's just kind of breaking that cycle. And I regularly do it. I'm not perfect, but I've been fine without social media for the last couple years.
Yeah.
And so will others.
I think that's really helpful. I love the detox idea. I know for me, I actually use the do not disturb, the focus option on my iPhone. And for people who are listening, if you're like, well, what if I miss a call that's really important? Christy can always ring in. My wife can always ring in. In fact, my boss's assistant can always ring in. Like, I can determine who gets to ring in and who doesn't. And it's been really helpful because I can go that 3 or 4 hours. I can be in sessions with clients. I can do a Zoom call with you, and I'm not getting bombarded with interruptions. And it helps me to focus. It's actually really good for productivity, but it's also good for my mental health. And, Dave, you touched on this. You talked about this student. I think if you're a parent and you're listening and you're like, what is social media and screen time doing to my child? Like, help me out with that. Send us an email. Send us an email to chaplaincy@fearlessfollower.org. Make a comment on the podcast. Say something in the podcast comments. Ask us some questions, and I would be happy to host another Zoom session with Dave. We can talk about this. We'd be happy to get information to you, because the reality is it is so overwhelming and it's easy to get scared. But I think in a short bit, you can have a tech timeout. You can go on a tech timeout for your kids or for you, and that's not bad. It may be hard, but it's worth it because you are in control of your technology. It is not in control of you. And you can say no to that. And sometimes saying no to those things is the best thing you can do for your mental health.
And just real quick, I know we're running out of time. If you're a parent, one of the smallest and best things you can do, doesn't matter if you have a middle schooler or a high schooler, don't let your kids sleep with their device. Doesn't matter if it's their alarm clock. You can go to Target and get one. I know they'll say they need music to fall asleep to. You can get an Amazon Echo and it can just play music. There are so many ways to get around that. Remove devices from the room at night. It's one thing that just across the board, doctors, researchers will say that's the starting point. Don't sleep with your phone. And the unfortunate thing is, if you're going to do that, you have to model it. So just for your family, get your phones out of the room. I can expound on another podcast why that's so valuable, but it's a simple thing. They won't like you for a week, but there's actually long-term benefits from sleep, mental health, and all sorts of stuff by just simply starting by removing phones from your room.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Dave. And I think it's a good reminder too, for those of us who are parents, if our kids like us all the time, we're probably doing something wrong. And that's just a reality to embrace. Dave, we are so grateful for you. Thanks so much for joining us. And we'll have you back to talk more about stress or tech or kids or anything else, because you're awesome.
Thanks, man. Love being here, and everyone listening, we're cheering you on.
Thanks, pal. Well, I don't know about you, but I found that incredibly insightful and I think very helpful for me personally, as I consider how much I utilize digital technology, how much I utilize social media. And if you were challenged by this episode to maybe make some changes, let me encourage you. If you want some help in that, feel free to reach out to us at chaplaincy@fearlessfollower.org. And if this was a helpful episode for you, or you learned something new, could you give us some help and maybe share this with a friend, or go ahead and like and subscribe to the podcast. We would love to continue to send you helpful information in navigating mental health in and outside of the workplace. And on that note, if you work for a company that would like to engage in learning more about how the chaplaincy could maybe participate with your organization to bring information on emotional wellness, mental health, spiritual wellness, we would love to talk to you. And you can send us an email at chaplaincy@fearlessfollower.org. Thanks again for listening. Next time, we're going to dive into a new conversation with a good friend of mine, a man by the name of Steve Carter, and he's going to share some information with us about his book, The Thing Beneath the Thing. So I want to encourage you, stay tuned, because that's going to be a great conversation. We'll talk to you next time.